I want to just start by saying we got some exciting interest after the last class on Tuesday about MELD, so I just want to call that out from here. MELD is a platform we're incubating at Harvard to help accelerate high potential women like those in this class, and catalyze your placement in careers and your preparation for those careers. We gather in in-person forums, virtual forums, and the goal is to shorten the distance to access an opportunity for the kinds of leaders you want to talk to and those you want to be. And so if you're interested in learning more or joining us, our email is meldmore.com, or you can find us on Instagram at meetmeld. So please do that. We are only as good and as strong as your participation and your insights. So thank you. Okay, all of you are just getting started in charting your professional paths and your next steps in who you are and what you want to accomplish. And so we saw with the women from Twitter on Tuesday, and we're going to see again today, I'm sort of doing a takeover of this class to share with you the people I was in the trench with at the very beginning. Why that matters is because as you're just getting started, pay attention to the relationships that you develop, what you can learn from each other, what you're building together, because sometimes some of the most special relationships and the most productive teams are those who have been in it together for a really long time. And so Liz and I are an example of that. I'm excited, I'm pumped to welcome Liz to class today. So I'm going to give you a little bit of her bio for a second. She was the director of rapid response for the Obama campaign in 2007, 2008, and I think again in 2012. Okay, long hauler. Here's what it means to be the director of rapid response. It means that you have the dirt on others and you help to manage the time and place to throw that dirt while you pay attention to keeping your own workspace clean. So she knew where the bodies were buried and was able to point reporters and staffers to go find them on their own with no fingerprints, which is pretty awesome. Axios has called Liz Jarvis-Shean one of the most experienced startup communicators in the game. She currently serves as VP of Communications and Policy at DoorDash, reporting directly to the CEO, overseeing comms and policy, growing her team from 9 to 65 team members in just 3 years. She's a track record of thriving in intense, high-pressure environments. The White House, Tesla, Airbnb, and now DoorDash, and she's going to tell us her favorite anecdotes and bodies buried at each of those spaces. Today, part of this is about building your own vision, but also managing for opposition and competition. And nobody does that better than Liz. So please welcome Liz Jarvis-Shean. Welcome, lady.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone, for letting me join you today and maybe tell a few war stories and hopefully a few other things. Thank you to Katie for hosting. Look, my goal, I have some, let's call them semi-prepared remarks that I'm going to sort of walk through, but really my goal is to make sure that we have a conversation, and so I'm really excited for the student panel and a number of those questions. But yeah, look, as Katie said, in the end, my job is telling a good story, but also making sure that we have a good story to tell. And sort of what does that mean? Look, I look around here, I know the class, I know the coursework. If you're sitting in here, you've probably decided you want to be a founder CEO, you want to run an incredible world-class organization, you might want to run for office. I'll be honest, while I feel lucky to run world-class teams, I'm not a founder CEO. I'm definitely not going to run for office. And I am probably not going to be a founder CEO, but I have been lucky, as Katie talked about, to work for some world-changing people who have done those things. And I have learned a ton from them, and I've also been able to tell sort of stories on their behalf. I have run research. It is often called oppo. It does not involve hiding out in bushes with long lens photo cameras or digging into trash cans. Most of the time it involves incredibly boring research in paper, but it is fun because you get to tell a story. Rapid response, same sort of thing. And part of it is pulling together what have you learned and what do you know. But the other thing that I want to kind of talk about first here, before we get to your competition and your opposition, is yourself. because I have also run self-research. And self-research is understanding yourself as a candidate. You're the product. What are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? What are your opportunities? What are the threats against you? But most importantly, like, what do you offer to the world? At the core of what you are doing, whether you are running for office, whether you are thinking about going to market with a new product, you are thinking about an innovation that is meant to solve a problem for someone or for an audience. And hopefully, by definition, your innovation is something that has either never been seen before, never been conceived of, or it is a step change improvement on what is already out there. It is often unfamiliar to your audiences, be they customers or voters. It's often unregulated, and it's almost never trusted. So earning trust, building your reputation, those are the things that you do through telling the story of what you're offering. Another thing to keep in mind, as you're thinking about your own product, whether it's, again, yourself or what you're building, while you always want to tell a good story, do not bullshit people. Like, if you take one thing away, do not bullshit your audience. That is different from telling a good story. Nobody trusts a phony. Voters, customers, employees, they smell it a mile away. And they may not smell it immediately, but they smell it eventually, and it stinks to high heaven. Take it from someone who almost ran communications for Elizabeth Holmes. If it doesn't work, you cannot ultimately succeed. It means nothing if you can't execute. So have the vision, think about what you're solving for somebody, but make sure you can execute on it. That is then when you can develop a narrative and connect it to what you are solving for people. I imagine most of you, as you're thinking about what you want to take to market, ultimately want to become a household name. A noun, a verb, a single name, Taylor, share, whatever. Band-Aid, Kleenex, Scotch tape, Xerox, Google, Zoom, hopefully DoorDash. All of these are those kinds of names. But if your aspiration, which again I assume it is to be that kind of household name, with that the lights only get brighter, the scrutiny only becomes more powerful, and again your opponents and competitors only become stronger and more excited to take you down. So what does it mean for those lights to get brighter? The quality of your initial product, but also the pace of your subsequent innovation has to be better and faster than the first thing. The first thing that you go to market with should be revolutionary. But that then sets the expectations for your customers. So what are you going to solve for them next? Your storytelling has to resonate with more people, not fewer, the more successful you become. And you have to do this sort of very challenging balancing act of simultaneously telling a broader story to a bigger audience and being more focused for particular cohorts you're probably trying to reach. Decision-making and doing the right thing becomes harder. The more successful you are, the harder it is to actually do the right thing, because the stakes get higher, you start worrying about what you're going to lose, the stakeholders become more plentiful and in some ways more powerful. It feels easy to do the right thing when you're a small founder CEO bootstrapping something. First round of funding, all of a sudden you've got a board. Your board might have a different view on what is the right thing to do versus what is not. The bigger and bigger and bigger you get, the more of those voices are in the room. You've got to decide, what do you stand for, what are your values, and what is the right thing to do. And in the end, the strength of your reputation, the more successful you become, is more central to your success and your longevity. With regard to reputation, I was thinking about quoting Taylor Swift. That felt like a bad idea because I am, again, an old person. But Socrates, regard your good name as the richest jewel you can possibly be possessed of. A reputation is a business imperative. If your reputation, it's not the same thing as your brand. I want to be really clear. It plays into your brand, but it is not the same thing. What do people think of you? Do they trust you? Will they continue to come back to you? Again, do you solve a problem for them in a way that makes their life better? It's not the same thing as a PR crisis. It's not the same thing as marketing. They play into it. But that is somewhere between 25 present to 2/3 of your company's value. So take it seriously. Reputation is the kind of thing that protects you from the storms that are invariably coming your way. Political campaigns, startups, popular brands, all of it is a microcosm for everything that happens in our daily lives. Just because it's software and it's eaten the world doesn't mean that it doesn't impact real people. And when things go wrong, as you guys know, like here in the year of our Lord, 2023, everybody sees it. And they see it faster and in more places than ever before. And that's only going to increase in the years ahead. So, if you're talking about 1/4 to 2/3 of your company's value, and that's your reputation, and you know these things are going to be coming your way, I'm not here to tell you that you're powerless and like you got to just hunker down. You're like, oh shit, I just need to not make mistakes. I need for things not to go wrong. That is not the takeaway here. Things are going to go wrong. You are going to make mistakes. Product is going to break. You are going to misspeak. Employees are going to be unhappy. All of this stuff is going to happen. Don't focus on preventing those things from happening as if you can prevent every single thing. Know who you are. Know what your value proposition is to your audiences and what you stand for, and use those things to start building and protecting a reputation that's going to help you withstand the storm long term. All right, so if you're like, all right, I know the importance of innovation. I know the importance of execution. I know the importance of reputation. What in the hell am I actually supposed to do with all your platitudes, Jarvis? Great question. How do you know if you're sort of on the right track? Again, it has to start with, I promise ML, I'm going to get to the competitive analysis, but it does start with yourself. Your own product, your own campaign, your own set of ideas. First of all, who is your audience? Doesn't have to be just one, but know your audience, because you're going to build for them and you're going to communicate to them. What problem are you solving for them? At DoorDash, every single memo that we do in planning, product innovation, but also communications and policy starts with a question and a box at the top. Who are we solving for and what problem are we solving? That's the North Star. That's the thing that drives every single thing that we're trying to innovate. We are not trying to solve for ourselves. Who are our audiences and what are we trying to do for them? It's also incredibly important to kind of root yourself in that early, because as your organizations become bigger and more successful, again, as you have more stakeholders, investors, board members, shareholders, whatever it is, it's really easy to let that cacophonous noise take you away from the very fundamental thing of solving a problem. So ingrain that in your culture. Who are your audiences? What problems are you solving for them? Second thing, again, dodge that Theranos bullet, but your shit has to work. It doesn't have to work perfectly, and you can keep working on improvement, but it has to work. Great vision cannot be vaporware. It actually does have to work. It seems obvious, but especially for storytellers, don't get so caught up in trying to tell a good story that you forget how to execute, that you forget about operational excellence, because that is really the thing, and I'll share an example here in a hot second about like what carries you forward and really what propels your narrative and your storytelling. Because that narrative, that story, for it to be compelling, for it to be resonant, for you to know who you're telling it to, it has to be built on that foundation. You need a mission and an origin story that are real and true. Once you know your audiences and what you're building is for them, it's not just that you're telling a story about them, it actually then becomes that you're talking to them. And when you're able to interweave those two things, that's part of how you build loyalty and connectivity and stickiness to whatever it is that you're building and then going to build upon. So as you lay sort of brick after brick of your narrative, the story is going to align with the value you deliver. And then, I say this as a communicator and a policy person, setting objectives and measuring things in, let's call them the softer sciences, can be very hard. It doesn't mean you don't do it. There's always signal to be found. And you have to have the clarity of setting, call them OKRs, call them KPIs, call them whatever you want, pick your framework, but you have to have a set of goals and objectives. Because otherwise, when you go out there with your storytelling, it's just gonna be spaghetti against the wall. Look, anybody can get positive PR about something. Like, it's not that hard, and it's a wonderful sugar high. You're like, oh my God, so-and-so wrote about a thing, and they're like, oh, this is so cool, and I got it on X and Y and Z, or this influencer. That's great. How does that ladder up to a set of objectives? How does it drive your business forward? What difference does it make? It has to make a difference, and so you need to know what your objectives and goals are. Again, are you trying to introduce yourself to voters so that you can begin to think about running in a primary? Are you trying to capitalize on your existing name recognition and get to the general? Are you trying to raise an early round? Or are you trying to enter a new category against your competitors? You need to know what you're trying to do before you go do it. I also think, and I'll get to this in a little bit more detail, but this is, I think, then where the competitive analysis does start to come in. Because my assumption is at this point, you know yourself, you know your product, you know what your value is. You know your own strengths and weaknesses. Now it's time to take stock of what does the field look like. And again, I love opposition research. I love it. I cannot describe to you guys how good landing a good oppo hit feels on a campaign. It is just like magic. But it only works if you both know your competitor and your opponent and you know yourself. So you've done that, and again, then how are you going to measure? Here are a few things to think about. You know, attributes really does mean like what is your value and are you delivering it? And how do you measure whether your customers think that you are delivering it? You do want to have some kind of metric to get a sense of where you now are positioned against competitors. That can be any number of things, right? It can be market share. It can be, you know, time from testing to full-scale launch, and like, are you ahead of your competitors on the product roadmap? It can be if they're copying you, because it turns out it is the sincerest form of flattery. But know what that looks like. Do measure PR and marketing. Please do not let anybody tell you you can't do it. You absolutely can. It's not perfect, but I'm happy to tell you all about some like various tools that are available. And measure your reputation. And there's a difference, right? Some of these things are snapshots in time. Product launch. What did we see down in terms of downloads? What did we hear from potential partners? All that's a snapshot in time. Reputation, much longer time horizon, but it can be measured. Probably want to do it quarterly. It's certainly at least annually, because you're going to get a lot of noise, but you want to do it. Because what you need to know, and we'll talk about this in a second, is, among other things, what is a fire drill and what is a fire? Is this something you can douse short term? Or is this like the entire building is about to burn down? You need to know the difference. So again, sometimes you're looking for that instantaneous sense of what's going on, and sometimes you need a longer horizon to get to know, like, I'm a little bit off track. Again, how is your offering new, different, and better? Are you standing in a glass house as you pull back your arm to throw that stone? When do you take the shot? And when is it a pump fake or a head fake? And when and how do you just do the right thing? So maybe a few examples. I ran communications at Tesla for the better part of 2 years, 2013 to 2015. I have no doubt that all of you sitting here have some opinion of my former boss. I have them too. We can talk about that, but that's not the point here. The point here is that before Tesla existed, electric vehicles they largely looked like golf carts, they definitely drove like golf carts, and they had a very, very small appeal to a very particular audience that tended to be environmentalists, or people who cared about those kinds of issues. When you think about how truly new, different, and better is your offering, these initial products from Tesla were revolutionary. Nobody who got into that car, even like the most die-hard, Detroit, big gas guzzling person, like the moment they got into that car and they put their foot to the floor and you got that instant torque, was like, holy shit. This is game-changing. And it came in the wrapper of a car that was the sexiest thing to come out of American automotive in, what, a generation, 2 generations? Look, the build quality is maybe not always the best. There are definitely some issues. We don't need to talk about autopilot, but like The product that Tesla brought to market was fundamentally new, it was fundamentally different, and it was light years better than everything else. And that was one of the things that I did learn from Elon. He was like, because automotive PR was a very traditional industry. There was a playbook that you ran every single time, whether you were introducing a sports car or a minivan. And oftentimes you really had to run the playbook because it turns out getting journalists to be super pumped about your new minivan might require business class tickets to go ice driving in like Norway. And Elon was like, we're not going to do that. And we're not going to introduce things on a calendar of auto shows. We built the best car in the world. We just need to get people in the car and they're going to understand it. And I think that that's borne itself out. Second one, when to take the shot and when to pull, when to do a little bit of a pump fake. There were a bunch of options from 2012, but this one is one of my favorites. We had done that competitive analysis of Governor Romney because we were pretty confident he was going to be our opponent. So even before the end of 2011, we had pretty much all of our research on Romney ready to go. We also knew everything about Barack Obama. What were our strengths? What were our vulnerabilities? What were our weaknesses? One of the easiest hits on Mitt Romney at the time was that he was a flip-flopper. He had been governor of the great Commonwealth of Massachusetts earlier in his career, had been more liberal in a lot of his policy positions, and as he made his way running for president in 2008, and then again subsequently in 2012, moved to the right. It turned out, though, that voters didn't really care that much about the flip-flopping. What they cared about was that he had moved to the right, and they felt like a lot of those positions were out of step with where they were. So what we were trying to figure out was, how do we make sure that now that he's to the right, he stays to the right? So, little pump fake. This was $10,000 worth of digital ads. This was a bullshit ad buy. Like, this was not for real. We were like, oh my God, we're doing an ad campaign about Mitt Romney flip-flopping. We did not really do an ad campaign about Mitt Romney flip-flopping. We built a sweet little website. We did a few things. And it moved that whole campaign to even further to the right and like solidified him over there. And that became the thing that we ran on. Those positions that were far to the right. Not that he had flip-flopped, not that he had changed where he really was. And then the last thing, when do you just do the right thing? Look, sitting here, you might think it's easy to be like, everybody's anti-Nazi, right? It turns out it wasn't that obvious for a lot of folks. 2017 was at Airbnb, and we started seeing chatter within the sort of messaging app of folks looking to book homes in Charlottesville. And it was very clearly folks from Unite the Right and others. And to Brian Chesky's everlasting credit, he has built a company and a culture where you do the right thing. And it didn't even occur to folks that you didn't flag it and say, hey, shouldn't we think about deactivating these folks? Because this goes against our terms of service. It also goes against our mission. We are a home sharing platform that is about creating connections and making people feel welcome. And we have neo-Nazis organizing house parties for after their rally. So we took the steps, took them off the platform. Again, you might think it's pretty easy to be anti-Nazi. Literally 3 or 4 weeks later, I was speaking at a financial services company that was grappling with whether or not they were going to suspend the accounts of the people who were processing transactions for the Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville. And they're like, how'd you make the decision? What was your calculus? What were the factors? And it's like, well, shit. In the end, it's just the right thing to do. And you have to have that courage of your convictions and have that moral compass. So, look, in the end, I say this to my team a lot. They're tired of me saying it, but it is true. You cannot just tell your story better. You have to have a better story to tell, and you have to build that better story every single day. Whether you are, still in, whether you're running in a primary race or sort of, the startup version of it, you're still small, you're still in stealth, all of those kinds of things. You're like, please, somebody fund me. Y'all are going to do great with your pitches, I promise you. But even then, you're going to need a good story to tell. But you have to have the sort of those tools. Success is a high-class problem that all of you already have, and you're only going to have more of that as you move on in your careers. And the more successful you are, the bigger your brand, the higher you're scaling on Everest, the velocity and the amount of information about your ideas, about your products, your innovations, your leadership style, that's only going to go in one direction. It's going to be faster, louder, and greater every single year. So, make sure you have a good story to tell. Tell it well. I have no doubt that you all will, but start with that great story. Know who you are, know what your value proposition is to the people who you're trying to reach. Hopefully that's not for me. Fingers crossed. But again, the odds are like overwhelming that you are going to face criticism and celebration. All of those things are great. Don't worry too much about the criticism and don't be too captivated by the celebratory sort of plaudits and everything like that. Like, keep your eyes on the prize. And remember, if you want to tell a story, you gotta have a good one to tell. That's all I got. Now, I think the panel's gonna come up. Okay.
Yeah, I'll first introduce myself. My name is Cassandra. I am a sophomore studying biology and econ on the pre-med track.
Good for you. I took rocks for jocks, I'm not gonna lie.
Hi, my name is Manit. I'm a master's student from Brown, studying innovation management and entrepreneurship.
Wonderful.
Hi, my name is Alexandria. I am a senior at the college studying government, gender studies, and French with a pre-law focus.
Okie doke. All right.
Okay, so I'll get us started with the first question. So you've worked at very big organizations like the White House, you worked at big companies like Tesla, Airbnb, and DoorDash. And when you were graduating college and, entering what we call like the real world, what were some of like the expectations versus realities that you faced? Like, in other words, like, was there something in particular you thought was going to be some way and then it turned out completely the other way? Or something that you thought was going to be one way and it didn't go that way?
Absolutely. Probably two big things. The first was, I thought I was going to be a lawyer. It turns out I didn't like the law. And so after I graduated, both my parents are public service, they're retired now, but public service lawyers in California. I come from a family of public servants and military types, and I'll be honest, I think sort of my career in tech is this huge surprise because I didn't even know that the private sector really existed as like an option that would have been interesting for me. I thought I was going to be a public service lawyer. Both my parents were like, you should work with lawyers first before you go to law school and understand what is the work day to day. And I did that. I went and worked in the legal department at what was then called NARAL, Pro-Choice America. I think they've gone through a couple of different branding, but it turned out, and I had this moment of clarity during the 2004 election. Election night, we're sitting there, I beg your pardon, it was 2002, midterms. And I'm sitting there working on some stuff in like a policy review document and something for litigation. And down the hallway in a conference room is the political team, and they're watching the results coming in from election night. If you're a Democrat, like I am, 2002 was not a great cycle for us, to say the least. And I was like, I am in the wrong part of this building, but I'm also probably in the wrong part of this town. Like, I wanted something different. And so, takeaway from that, I think number one is try a bunch of things and see if they're actually what you want to do. And I think it relates to lesson number two, which is very rarely is any decision you make a one-way door. And I think I felt paralyzed not knowing that early on. I was like, what if I make the wrong decision? What if I take the wrong job? What if I had studied the wrong thing? And like, you all are remarkably talented. And don't be afraid of making the choice and getting the experience, because that's going to inform what comes next. Very rarely is the thing that you're going to choose, is it going to foreclose a whole host of options that you can't find a way to revisit later. And so I think when I had that revelation of like, oh gosh, I don't want to be a lawyer, I want to work on campaigns, I was like, oh God, but I've been studying for the LSAT and doing this thing, and like I haven't been on a campaign. And it was like, I look back on that and I was like, just chill out and go do the thing as opposed to worrying that you've somehow foreclosed this entire world that you didn't even know existed.
Thank you.
Okay, so you've had extensive experience in high-pressure environments in multiple companies. So how do you see the role of communications evolving in today's fast-paced digital landscape?
It's a great question. I mean, one of the things that I love about my boss, Tony Shu, is even in the early conversations that we had about me joining, he was like, my expectation is that communications and policy are business functions. You're not a support function. You're not here to like follow the elephant with a shovel and clean up after it. You are business functions, and you may not come to this company and run a P&L, which is definitely for the best for everybody, but I expect you to understand how the business operates and think about your strategies vis-a-vis how it can support our audiences. And so when I think about communications, I think that's becoming more prevalent for both communications and policy. We are seen as a part of the business, not like a bolt-on or a support function. I think the thing that is really, if that's sort of changing like how one thinks about it from a business perspective and how you all might want to think about, as you build your teams and go to market and start building out a small communications team, I think the other thing that is changing rapidly, and it changes every single year, is where and how you reach your audiences. Right, like back when Katie and I were on the campaign in 2008, things like Sunday shows mattered enormously. They mattered enormously for driving the day and driving the news, and how, it set the tone for coverage in the Times and the Post and these other outlets that then trickled down into what people read in their local newspapers and what they saw on local televisions. And that all still is true to some extent. Maybe not so much the Sunday shows, but that remains true to some extent, and that is still where a group of voters get their information and their news. But I bet most of you don't watch the 5:30 local news like my dad does, right? But hopefully you're all registered and you're all going to vote. And the places where you find your information, your news, your content, the people and the channels that you all find credible are not the same as they are for me, and they're definitely not the same as they are for my parents. And I think communicators have to have respect for their audiences and meet them where they are. And I think that there's still a little bit of a gap there. I'll give you one very quick example. So 2014, we're getting Model S out to every, road and track, car and driver, all the normal folks who were supposed to sort of again, set the tone for the auto industry. And there's a young man who was running social media for me, and he's like, hey, boss, I think we should give a press car to Marquise Brownlee for a week. I was like, who the fuck is Marquise Brownlee? And he's like, oh, he's got this YouTube channel where he does product reviews and blah, blah, blah. And I was like, all right, put him on the list, we'll get to it eventually. It's like, sure. It turned out to be one of the most widely viewed reviews at the time, and that was back in 2013, 2014, before Marquise has, he has 18 million followers on his YouTube channel. He is an authority now for a set of people who are looking to understand what is a great product. They were not going to read Road and Track. They were going to watch what Marquise was saying.
Similarly, drawing off of the experience you've had at companies like Tesla, DoorDash, and Airbnb, and campaigns at the highest level, what is something specifically from your political experience that has influenced your approach to corporate communications, especially in addressing challenges and crises, or what experiences were most applicable to your corporate job?
I love that question. There are probably a bunch of different examples, but I would say the most important thing was just the pace at which we moved in political communications, which I think was not the pace at which corporate communications was accustomed to moving. And again, that was in the sort of 2008 to 2012, 2013. Were we the first Facebook campaign in 2008? Yeah. Anyhow, right? So it was a little back in the day, but the velocity that the team moved at. It not just matched the increased pace of journalism, but in some ways I think it set the pace. And that just like metabolism didn't feel like it existed in the, like that was part of why I needed to find that right fit and going to work for Elon. Again, we can talk about all the things that y'all may want to talk about, but like they moved at a different pace than anybody in Detroit or, you know, the big automakers out of Germany. And similarly, and that has just only increased. And so I think that's the big thing. That's one of the big things that I know I like looked for as well, of like finding that match. And I think the other thing is, it really is like, you have to control your own narrative. Right? We had a black guy with a funny name running for president, and he knew who he was, and he knew what his story was, and he knew what his vision was. There were a lot of people who wanted to tell a lot of different stories about Barack Obama, but he's like, this is my narrative, this is the story we're gonna go tell. That, I think, is so important. Even if you're at a company where you have an incredibly diverse product offering, like you have to know that core thing and not let other people tell your story. You have to do it yourself.
And sort of as a follow-up, given the high-paced environment you're in,
yes,
what are some key strategies or insight you've gained along the way in effectively managing such a fast-paced, competitive, and dynamic setting?
So I think the first thing is, don't fool yourself that you can manage it all. That can't be how you measure success for yourself or your teams. Like, in this day and age, there's too much incoming, there's too much outbound. It's not a Herculean task, it is an impossible task. So success cannot be defined by like really managing every single bit of it. You have to define your success, again, like you need to decide for yourself what success looks like, what are your objectives, and how do you want to measure it. And then the other thing, I think, becomes a judgment question, which is you have to, in addition to knowing the difference between a fire and a fire drill, you have to know which fires you can let burn and which ones you have to put out immediately. And that's both true of like sort of proactive communications and reactive communications. Said differently, like you have to keep the main thing the main thing. You need to know what is important and what is not, because you're not going to be able to cover all of the waterfront. And so, you know, I think it's why things like listening tools and other types of technologies that can give you early signal on like, how big is something? How much attention is this getting? Are we successful with this? Or like, is this a real problem? Some of it you're gonna do on gut, but the more you can also do to like get that early signal and then measure it long term is helpful.
And if you could share some insight into the differences in like work culture and environment between the different companies that you work with, like in the White House, Airbnb, Tesla, and DoorDash.
Yeah. You know, the White House and the campaigns, it was no drama Obama. And I will say, I think I have found DoorDash to be the most similar, insofar as everybody plays for the team on the front of the jersey, not the name on the back. Like, and that sets the tone. It doesn't mean that you have, you know, sort of passive aggressive, everybody agrees, and then you like appeal the decision behind somebody's back. It doesn't mean that. Like, both are very robust cultures of strong points of view and disagreement, but in the end, everybody plays for the team on the front of the jersey. And I just love that. I think in some ways, sort of Tesla and DoorDash and Airbnb are different, not just because of the founders, in the same way that campaigns are like like every organization is ultimately a reflection of the person at the top of the food chain. And you all are leaders already, and you're going to be leaders. Like, you need to know that. And there's a weight to that you're going to get more and more comfortable with, but like acknowledge that. You are going to set the culture. You are going to set the tone. And so Elon and Tony and Brian are very different, obviously. I think that Tesla was, at least the time I was there, it was this like iconoclastic upstart in a way that, you know, there was nothing like it. And that was very different. Airbnb is like, it's experiential, right? It's travel and escapism and like that then informs, it's a very design-forward company because it's all about the feel and the experience that people are having on travel. How are they connecting with people in local communities? And then, DoorDash it's a very operationally intensive culture because we, sit across a three-sided marketplace where every second and every penny matters to our merchants, to Dashers, and to customers. And so I think those are sort of the different ways. Yeah.
So now that you have worked in both sectors, government and tech,
Yes.
so how do you feel that, like, what can you offer on the intersection of, like, business, tech, government, and how can they all collaborate together to, like, address pressing societal issues?
Yeah, well, ain't that the million-dollar question? And in some ways, it's part of the fun of what I get to do right now, which is also overseeing the policy team and I think trying to bring together those different elements. I do think the first thing that the private sector, and I think the private sector has gotten better at it, is to see government and the communities where you operate as important stakeholders, not as oppositional forces. It doesn't mean you're not going to disagree, but they are not an opponent, they are not a competitor. Like, it is important to have that dialogue. I do think we probably would have been I think I would have been a better public servant had I spent a little bit of time in the private sector before I was in the White House. I think I would have had a better, and I had some of it, right? Like, I worked for a bunch of small businesses growing up. In particular, the family of a woman my father was married to was this sort of like local ice cream empire in Sacramento, Leatherby's, if any of you are Sacktown folks. And I worked there for several summers and like got to know how hard it was to run that business. And I think if I'd had a little bit more perspective and experience in that, I probably would have been a better public servant, just recognizing some of those puts and takes that like small business owners have, and how hard that is, how tight margins are, and those kinds of things. But ultimately, I think really the private, like, government needs to see, I think it's important for government to recognize that companies in the private sector have a role to play, and that we are not oppositional, and I think that's vice versa.
Do you think you could describe a moment in your career that you feel that you've had the most impact or that you're most proud of?
Oh, yeah. I mean, easily the biggest one, well, I mean, the three big ones were election night 2008, happy 15, election night 2012. But I think in the White House, it was the day that the Affordable Care Act passed. I sort of joked about the Elizabeth Holmes thing, but like, I worked on the ACA every day I was in the White House. I ran the coordinated sort of war room with House and Senate leadership when we were in the throes of what it was like 14 months it took us to get that passed. Like, it mattered very deeply to me. And we all knew it mattered to the president. We knew it mattered to the first lady. Like, and it mattered because it mattered to voters. And you had those moments of like, oh my God, are we gonna get this thing done? And the night that we got it done, Michelle and the girls and Mrs. Robinson were actually in New York for spring break, right? And so the president hosted us upstairs in the residence for a cocktail party. And I remember standing on the Truman balcony, which is like, are you kidding me? Did I just like wake up in some fugue dream state? Like, how did I get here? And our friend Kate Bedingfield, who subsequently was President Biden's communications director, and she's like, everybody, like, you just have to check this. Like, this is one of the top 5 moments of your life. Like, one of the top 5 moments of your professional career. We have worked on this as this team for years, and we worked on this as a party for generations, and like, this happened. And it just would, like, I do feel like in your career in life, it's very rare that you get those moments of like, phew. And that was one of them.
Yeah, following up on that, what were some of like the key challenges that you faced when you guys passed the Affordable Care Act? And how did you guys ensure that it had like a successful implementation?
Okay, so I wasn't there for the implementation, so the website is not my fault. I mean, the passage, So what it started with more than anything was the president. He's like, I will stake my presidency on this. Like, I will be a one-term, we are going to get this done. We are not going to water this down. Like, we are going to get it done. We have majority margins in the House and the Senate. We are, like, if we don't do this, nobody is going to do this for another generation, if not longer. Like, we will do that. And that kind of very explicit call out from the top sets the tone. And I think, again, for you all as leaders to be that clear with your teams, like, this is the thing. This is the thing that has to be true. We can, like, there's a bunch of other stuff that flows from it, but this has to be true. And my expectation is that all of you grab your respective oar and row in that direction. Setting that direction for the team was enormously helpful. We had to make a bunch of compromises, obviously. It's like the Cornhusker kickback. Oh my God, it's like PTSD. But I also think we were incredibly lucky to have partners like Speaker Pelosi and Harry Reid as Senate Majority Leader, and everybody working together, because they in some ways had the more challenging job of like wrangling their respective caucuses, and we figured it out. There's a bunch of sort of guts of the legislative process that we could talk about, or like the we had this like healthcare conference at the Blair House as this sort of like final convening moment. But I think from the outset, the most important thing was like the president was like, we're going to do this. And every moment where it was like, I don't know that we can. Martha Coakley doesn't win Teddy Kennedy's seat, and Scott Brown becomes senator from the Commonwealth here. And we're like, shit. And he was like, no, we are going to do this. Figure out a way. We are going to get this done. And that, I think, is really, like, in the end, what the answer was.
So we have actually also had a lot of questions on your current role at DoorDash.
Okay.
So let's shed light on that. So what's the most pressing upcoming challenge you see at DoorDash, or that DoorDash might eventually could face, and how do you and your team are navigating through it?
Yeah. I mean, look, I think the biggest upcoming challenge is the same. The answer is the same today as it was a year ago, as it's going to be a year from now. It is, how do we keep innovating to offer solutions for our customers, right? So we think of customers sort of sitting across three sides of the marketplace. A lot of it really does start with those local merchants, who now, many of whom are online and have e-commerce channels in a way that they didn't pre-pandemic because they needed them. So the team did a phenomenal job of building all kinds of things and like expanding our capacity to be able to take on that many merchants, especially like early days of COVID. I mean, everybody from our CEO on down is like manually entering menus and other things into the website because so many people, so many business owners needed those e-commerce channels. So it's like, okay, well, now they're online. And now they have this channel, and we already built payment processing, and we handle the back-end logistics for them and all that. What's next? The question should always sort of be like, what have you done for me lately? Like, we have to always be asking ourselves that. Same thing for consumers. It's like, well, restaurant delivery is where we started, but what comes next? Convenience, retail, flowers, grocery. What else can we do? Same thing for Dashers, started with, say, a pay per task opportunity. Well, we heard from some folks that they wanted greater certainty on an hourly basis. So we built something called time mode, which is like you can sign up for that hour or whatever you want to do and have a guaranteed hourly wage that you're making, and cool. Or we're going to, build a product called Dash Me Home, that is, if you've done dashes that have taken kind of from Valley to Dell and you're like, all right, I want to go home, it's going to surface to you opportunities that will literally take you back to your house. All of those things are fantastic. I'm very proud of them because we're meeting those needs, but the challenge is, what do we do next? What is next? How do we make their lives better? What are the new problems that they're going to have that we've got to go solve?
There's this AI hype going on right now. A lot of companies are implementing it, probably even DoorDash. But have you guys given it a thought, once this is over after a few months, everyone has implemented it, lives are a little easier.
Right.
What's after that?
I mean, I think the first thing is to figure out, how do you actually make it useful for people? So can you help make the day-to-day of a local business owner easier? Insofar as like, can you better automate the process by which they understand the orders that are coming in, and therefore like what is successful on their menu, but also what does that mean for what you have in stock, and just like have processes set up that will automatically reorder, say, the chicken because everybody loves chicken nuggets, and like all of those kinds of things. It's, in some ways, I think it's really important to get very, very practical with it, as opposed to kind of sitting up in this like, oh my God, the robots are coming for us and we're all gonna die. It's like, what does this actually do? But I think 6 months from now, or a year from now, there'll be a new hype train, right? It was like, everybody was like, 2 years ago, what problem is crypto solving? Let's maybe not get into it, but like, you would think about it like, well, could people pay on the block? Like, it's like, I don't fucking know, but like, you think about those things, and a year or two from now, there's gonna be something, even if generative AI does turn out to be something transformative in the way that, say, the transition to mobile was, there will still be something new that you ought to take a look at and think about, how does this actually help my customers? And if it doesn't, like, don't go chasing after it, go figure out a different way to help them.
I'm going to wrap us up and just say, if you could speak to the valedictorian of Berkeley when she was 21, 22.
Jesus, you're worse than my mom.
Thanks. That's flattering. What one message, if you knew then what you know now, what would you tell yourself? And then we'll wrap up for here.
What would I tell myself? I think probably 3 things. Don't be so afraid of the decisions that you're going to need to make. Remember, again, to your question and what we talked about, like, the people around you matter the most. And number 3 is define for yourself what success means. I think I felt a lot, on that third point, I think I felt a lot of pressure at that time to measure up to a set of expectations I thought my family had for me, or that I thought that professors had for me. And that was mostly me projecting. And what it kept me from doing was thinking about, like, what is important and fulfilling to me? And it took me a while to get there.
Awesome. Thank you, Liz. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.